Well, hey, welcome to First Church. So glad you guys are here. I know it's fall break, so we probably have some people traveling, but it looks like we have a great crowd in the room today. And we have a whole bunch of people joining us online as well, such as Dave out in Oologah, Teresa and Michael in OKC, Amy in California, Ashley here in Owasso, and a whole bunch of others. So if you are in the room, would you put your hands together, get loud, welcome in our online family. Glad that they are joining us for worship today also. And if you are new, my name's Chad, and we are a church that loves Jesus and loves like Jesus. That's our mission, that's our goal, that's what we strive to do every single day. And that's just not something that we say, it's what we want to put into action. And last week we had a primary opportunity to put that love of Jesus into action as we did a house build here on site. And we had hundreds of our First Church family come out to help build a couple homes for some local families in Tulsa in need. And so if you weren't able to be here last Sunday, take a look at what happened in this video clip. Yeah, you can get up for that. I love seeing the church in action. And while our house build was going on, we had something else taking place here on our campus. We had one of our 2 annual baby dedications. And so I got to speak at this. I typically do speak at our baby dedications. He has a full stage of young parents who are dedicating themselves to raising their children to know the Lord. And that's always an awesome moment. Like I said, we do 2 of these a year, but there's talk we're gonna have to do more than 2 a year because we have so many young families coming to our church, which is awesome. And they want to commit to raising their babies, raising their children to know Christ. And so that just warmed my heart to see these families excited about Jesus and make sure that their home is built on Jesus. So I was there speaking of that. Outside, we were having our home build, and I just was reminded of this verse right here as all this was taking place. John 1, verse 5, the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness can never extinguish it. We are so much bad news in our world today. There's so much darkness all around us, but in the midst of the darkness, God is still working through his church. The light is still shining, and we see that every single week here at First Church. So thank you for being a part of the mission that God has given us. And I don't know about you, but I just love being a part of this church and seeing God at work. But I'm excited about today as well, because today we are continuing in our series, 5 Ways to Wreck Your Life, as if you needed any help. But still, we are continuing in this series because we are looking at different destructive paths that people sometimes take in their lives that move them away from God, and they end up wrecking their lives. And we're looking at this book called Ecclesiastes. It's a book from the Old Testament, and it's really just a journal of an old man named Solomon. Solomon, who was king over Israel, who's reflecting on his life. And at one point, Solomon, well, he was a wise king. He sought God's wisdom, and God gave him the gift of supernatural wisdom. And as long as Solomon was focused on God, the kingdom was successful. Solomon lived a content, fulfilled life. Not that his life was easy, but he lived with purpose and meaning, and he saw God's hand at work. But somewhere over time, Solomon started to take his eyes off God and started to trust in his own instincts, and the wheels came off. And Solomon wrecked his life. And now as an old man, writing down his thoughts in this book that we now call Ecclesiastes, Solomon is reflecting on the mistakes that he made, how he moved further and further away from God. And even though as an old man, Solomon is looking at his life and seeing all what the world considers to be success, like he lived in a palace and he was king and he had all this power and authority. He had great wealth and possessions, and he was the envy of so many other world leaders. I mean, people wanted to be like Solomon. He was on the cover of every magazine. He wore the best clothes. He had the best chariots. He drove the best camels. He had it all. And yet, as Solomon reflects on his life, he looks at all that he has and he says this: meaningless, meaningless, utterly meaningless. Everything is meaningless. He says, I have seen all the things that are done under the sun. All of them are meaningless, a chasing after the wind. In other words, I've got all this stuff that everybody in the world seems to want, and yet I feel so empty. And Solomon didn't get to this point overnight. It was a gradual fade. It was a slow erosion as he moved further and further and further away from God. And he started to pursue these self-destructive tendencies that just got him even more and more away from God. And that's why at the very end of Ecclesiastes, Solomon comes to this conclusion. He says, now all has been heard. Here is the conclusion of the matter. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. In other words, Solomon says, you want to know what life is all about? Walk with God. Listen to him. Do what he says. And if you do, you will live a full, content life. If you're trying to find meaning and purpose in possessions, think again. If you're trying to find meaning and purpose in people, it's not going to work. If you're trying to find meaning and purpose in power or popularity or status, you're going to come up empty. If you're trying to find meaning and purpose in wealth, just keep on looking. Because none of the things that this world has to offer in and of themselves will give you what your soul is longing for. But if you want to live a full life, a life full of joy and peace and hope, do life with God. Remember your Creator all the days of your life and listen to him, because he does love you and he did create you for a purpose, and he has great plans in store for you. That's why in the New Testament, John writes these words: we know how much God loves us, and we have put our trust in his love, God's love, for God is love. What is the Bible revealing to us? God is love. It doesn't say God is loving, as if sometimes he loves, or he loves us under certain conditions, or he loves us when he wants to, or he loves us just under certain circumstances. No, what John here is saying is God is love, meaning love is at the essence, at the heart of who God is. And that means that everything that God does is out of his love, his great love for us, for you, and for me. And so, when God gives us instructions and commands and teachings, he's not trying to limit us. He's not trying to hold us back or keep us from having fun or anything like that. No, God's commands, his instructions are a reflection of his love. He cares for us, and he wants us to live the best possible life. Let me illustrate it like this. You've probably seen one of these before. Road closed sign. I asked for a road closed sign on stage, and this is what the road department brought me. Like, I thought maybe just a little sign. No, they brought me the big old road sign, which is awesome. I'm glad that they did, because you know me, I love big props, okay? But, so we've got this big road closed sign. You've probably seen one of these before, but probably a better question is, how many of you have ever been annoyed or frustrated by one of these signs? Yeah, hands are going up. I didn't ask you to raise your hands, but hands are going up. We've probably all been there. I think people have been annoyed and frustrated by this very sign right here, because there are dents and scratches all over it, I think people have hit it or maybe thrown things at it. I don't know. But especially when we're going down a road and we know the way and we're in a hurry, and all of a sudden we come across a road closed sign, we're like, what? Because we know it's going to interrupt our day. We know we're going to have to take a detour, a different path. And so what we had in mind isn't going to work out. We get frustrated when we see these signs. And so some people just ignore these signs. In fact, I Googled this week people who ignore road closed signs, and tons of news stories popped up of people who got in trouble for ignoring road closed signs. Here are a few examples. Like out in Philadelphia, driver ends up in a ditch after ignoring road closed signs. There's a reason why the road closed sign was there, so that he wouldn't end up in the ditch, or she wouldn't end up in the ditch. Not sure who it was. But how about this example from Sacramento? Driver ignores road closure, falls into collapsed road. There's a reason why the road closed sign was there, because there was a collapsed road that you're not supposed to get into. Okay, how about this example from Fresno? Another driver, notice another driver, as if this is an ongoing problem. Another driver crashes into sinkhole after ignoring road closure signs. And then one more example from Montana. Tourists get stuck in deep snow on Beartooth Highway after ignoring road closed signs. The one place where you probably don't want to get stuck in deep snow is on Beartooth Highway. That doesn't sound like a good idea. And yet apparently there were a lot of tourists getting stuck there. Why? Because they ignored the road closed signs. In fact, as I was looking up these different articles, I saw this one picture in one of the news articles of somebody who got stuck because they ignored a road closed sign. See, why are these signs up here? Why do they place these signs around? Not to annoy us. Not to frustrate us. There's nobody in the road department sitting around saying, I wonder how I can, tick people off in my community. That's not what they're trying to do. They put these up to prevent us from going into a danger zone. These signs are meant to help us, guide us, direct us away from possible danger. The signs are put up before we reach the danger zone so that we won't get there. And this is how God's commands work. See, God gives us commands and teachings and instructions not to rob us of fun, not to limit us, but because He knows the dangers ahead if we go down certain roads. And He's trying to warn us because He doesn't want us to go into the danger zone. See, what type of loving father would God be if He knew the potential dangers ahead in life and He didn't warn His children about them? What God is doing is saying, I'm telling you this stuff so that you won't wreck your life. And that's what the book of Ecclesiastes is all about. See, Solomon, he plowed through the road closed signs. He plowed through those orange cones and barriers that he wasn't supposed to go through. And that's why Solomon writes these words in Ecclesiastes. A wise person chooses the right road. A fool takes the wrong one. What is Solomon letting us know? There are two roads out there. There's God's road and then there's every other road. And if you stay on God's road, you're choosing the wise road, the road that will keep you safe, the road that will lead to your best possible life, a road of purpose and meaning found in Him. But you choose any other road, that's the wrong road. And it's going to lead to destruction. See, Solomon, he started following his own instincts. He plowed through the road closed sign. He was like, hey, I'm just going to go on down this road and have some fun. And he did for a while until he hit the sinkhole. Until he hit the ditch, the collapsed road, until he got to the danger zone. He had fun for a while until he wrecked his life. So what we're doing in this series is we're looking at different destructive roads and paths that Solomon took. And in week 1 of this series, we talked about how Solomon took the road of pleasure. He let pleasure drive his life, and that wrecked his life. And then we talked about in the second week, Matt did a great job talking about how Solomon took the road of isolation, trying to do life on his own. And by taking that road, he wrecked his life. Last week, we talked about how Solomon took the road of success. He made success his God. And so because of that, he wrecked his life. But today, we're going to look at another destructive path, another destructive tendency and trait that Solomon got caught up in. And this destructive tendency rears its ugly head in all of our lives at times. It's a destructive trait that creates an environment of envy and fear and anxiety and a lot of other unhealthy behavior. It allows for these behaviors to fester and grow, and it infects everything. This unhealthy trait, well, it keeps us from apologizing. It keeps us from admitting when we're wrong, even when we know we're wrong. It won't stop to ask for directions. It causes us to lose our cool. It keeps us angry even when we know we shouldn't be. It makes us be defensive at times when we shouldn't be. And it causes us to look down upon other people. It causes us to refuse help when we need it, and it keeps us competing with one another, even to the point that we will lie and cheat to get ahead of everyone else. It keeps us from learning new things. It keeps us from celebrating the victories of others. It makes us jealous of what other people have, to the point that we don't even want to see other people succeed. We would rather secretly see them fail. It stands in the way of our contentment. It stands in the way of our happiness. It stands in the way of our joy. It stands in the way of our relationship with God, our relationship with others, and it will pollute our soul. Anybody have a guess of what toxic trait, tendency we're going to be talking about today? Pride, yeah, pride. Now, let me just be clear. When I say we're going to be talking about pride, I am not talking about having a healthy self-image or appreciating what someone else has done, like if your kid does something well and you're proud of them. I'm not talking about that. You guys know what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about healthy self-esteem or anything like that. I'm talking about a puffed up sense of self-importance. I'm talking about an inflated ego, arrogance that drives you in life. Let me put it this way. What we're going to be talking about today is an obsession, an unhealthy obsession with self. And I know what some of you guys might be thinking. Well, yeah, I know a lot of people that struggle with that, but you're not thinking about yourself. Because a lot of times we have trouble seeing ourselves as arrogant and prideful and whatever else. But let me just mention this to you. Pride creeps into our lives when we think we are anything more than sinners saved by grace. When you start to think of yourself as anything more than a sinner that's been saved by the grace of God, that's when pride can creep into your life and start to do a number on you. And pride is a gateway sin. It's the path that really leads to all other sins because it slowly edges God out of our lives. Because when we allow for pride to come in, what we're doing is we are giving the throne of our hearts to ourselves. And God will not share the throne of our hearts with anyone else, even you. And so when we kick God off the throne, and we put ourselves there, it edges God out of our lives. And the more that we edge God out, the more room we make for sin. That's why in Psalm 10, verse 4, it says this: because he is proud, the evil person doesn't turn to the Lord. There is no room for God in any of his thoughts. When you let pride overtake you, you leave very little room for God, maybe no room for God at all. Pride is a self-imposed prison where you push everything else out but you. Push everyone else out but you, including God. And that's what happened to Solomon. Solomon started to trust in his own instincts more than God's wisdom. And we understand what would lead Solomon to do this. I mean, Solomon was a big deal. Solomon was king, after all. I mean, he lived in a palace and all that, but not just that, he was used to people obeying him. He was used to people listening to his commands and instructions and carrying them out. He was used to being in the headlines. He was a big deal. He was a somebody. He was charismatic and wealthy and well-educated and handsome, you name it. He was a big deal. He was a somebody. And Solomon's downfall wasn't due to his lack of wisdom. He had that. God supernaturally gave him wisdom. Solomon's downfall wasn't due to his lack of wisdom, but a lack of humility. He started to read his own newspaper clippings. He started to get caught up in his own self. And in so doing, at the end of his life, he figures out that he's living like a prideful know-it-all. Rather than a humble king depending on God and seeking God's wisdom, he ends his life as a prideful know-it-all. Listen to what he says. It is better to be a poor but wise youth than an old and foolish king who refuses all advice. Who's he talking about? Who's the old foolish king? It's him. And what he's saying is, I know I got all this stuff and power and wealth and whatever else. I know I got all this stuff, but it's better to be a poor kid who seeks God's wisdom than an old foolish king who won't listen to anybody, who lives like a know-it-all, who's full of pride, who won't listen to his friends when they try to give him advice, who won't listen to spiritual people who want him to live more godly, who won't even listen to God. It's better to be a young buck, a young kid who's poor and has nothing, but at least is listening to God, than an old foolish king who won't listen to anybody. See, Solomon got to the point in his life where he thought, I can handle life on my own. I don't need anybody else. I don't need friends telling me what to do. I don't need spiritual mentors. I don't need a small group of people that are going to help me along. I don't need God telling me what to do. I can handle it. I can do life on my own. I don't need anybody's help. And his attitude reminds me of the little girl on this clip trying to buckle her seatbelt. Take a look at this.
Can I help?
No. I help. I don't. You can help when we're out to eat, okay? You can help when we go out to eat.
Okay.
Do you have booster seats?
Probably. You want me to help, Rose?
No. Thank you. No, thank you.
What do you want me to do?
What about yourself? What about yourself? I'll do this one, so gonna do that. You drive! What about yourself? Go drive! Go!
I don't want to be her parents when she becomes a teenager, you know? But you know, that's how Solomon lived. Hey, I got this. I can handle it. I'm good on my own. Don't need anybody's help. God, I don't even need your help. And maybe you've been there before. And for a while, Solomon got by with that until his life became a train wreck. And so he writes these words in Ecclesiastes as well. Better to hear the quiet words of a wise person than the shouts of a foolish king. Again, who's he talking about? Better to have wisdom than weapons of war have resources. But one sinner can destroy much that is good. As dead flies cause even a bottle of perfume to stink, so a little foolishness spoils great wisdom and honor. What is Solomon saying? I had wisdom and I stunk it up. I had wisdom, I had honor, I had God on my side, and I stunk it up because I tried to do it on my own. I thought I knew better than anybody. I thought I even knew better than God. Pride overtook him. And that's why Solomon gives us this warning in Ecclesiastes 7, verse 8. Finishing is better than starting. Patience is better than pride. What's he saying? Hey, I started great, but I didn't finish well. And he's warning us, hey, you may be going along great right now, but that doesn't mean you're going to finish well. Don't let pride get the best of you. Don't let pride cut in on you. Don't let pride deceive you. Patience is better than pride. And what Solomon is saying here is, I stopped being patient with God. I stopped waiting on Him. I stopped listening to Him. God was taking too long, so I just jumped in and did it my way. I got tired of waiting on God. And I should have been patient. I should have listened. I should have paid attention. I should not have been so full of myself. Because pride leads to destruction. In fact, the Bible gives us this warning. Probably one of the most famous passages on pride is Proverbs 16:18, when it says, pride leads to destruction. A proud attitude brings ruin. You want to wreck your life? You want to ruin your life? You want to destroy your life? There it is. Pride leads to destruction. A proud attitude brings ruin. And here's why pride will destroy our lives. Because pride causes us to think that we are superior to other people. We think we're better than everybody else. Instead of seeing ourselves as sinners saved by grace, we see everybody else as those who are in the wrong, and we're better than everybody else. Oh yeah, we may mess up every now and then, but we're way up here and everybody else is down here. It gives us complex where we think we're superior to everybody else. But not only that, pride becomes judgmental to the point that we start to say, hey, the reason why they don't have what I have is because they must have messed up or made God mad or whatever. We start to judge other people. We start to think that our lives or our background or our talents are far better than everybody else. And we start to judge people unfairly. But not only that, pride avoids accountability to the point that we won't listen to advice. Even when somebody who we trust and who is godly comes to us and says, hey, you got this weak area in your life. We don't want to hear that. We just ignore them. We think they're in the wrong. And so we ignore all accountability. And we don't even listen to what God's trying to tell us because, again, we think we're always right. But then pride also promotes selfishness. We start to plow through people. We don't care who we hurt. We don't care who we offend because it's all about us. And so if I've got to lie, cheat, steal to get ahead, who cares? It's all about me. And so we start to run over other people in order to get what we want. But pride also leaves us cynical. Because here's the thing, we are not always going to get everything that we want in life. It just doesn't happen. And so when we don't get what we want because we're all about ourselves, we start to be irritable, and mad, and upset, and angry. We become cynical. We think, well, I just can't trust anybody. And we're mad because we're not getting what we want. The Bible is so right when it says pride leads to destruction. A proud attitude brings ruin. I love how the Message paraphrases this verse from Proverbs. It says this in the Message: first pride, then the crash, the bigger the ego, the harder the fall. I love that. And it's so true. But do you know who wrote those words, that pride comes before destruction? You know who wrote those words? Solomon did. But here's the thing, Solomon wrote those words before he let pride wreck his life. Solomon wrote those words not in Ecclesiastes, but early on in his life when he was still following God's wisdom. Solomon knew before he ever wrecked his life that pride had the potential of wrecking his life, and yet Solomon let pride wreck his life anyway. What does that tell us? Well, pride is really good at working undercover. Remember what I said earlier? You can recognize pride in somebody else like that. But see your own pride? That's a different story. We don't always see pride and arrogance and boastfulness in ourselves, do we? But we're quick to see it and recognize it in other people. And so because of that, pride, well, it can take us out before we ever see it coming. Because it's sneaky. And we start to make excuses for our pride. You guys know this to be true. I mean, hey, I'm not arrogant. I'm just confident. And confidence is a good thing. I'm not a know-it-all. I'm just intelligent. And people are intimidated by me. I'm not bragging. I'm just telling you about what's going on in my life. I can't help what happens to me. I'm not selfish. I'm just driven, focused. I'm not unloving. I'm just right. And if people can't handle the truth, that's their problem. I'm not entitled. I just want what I want and I go for it. I'm not overly cynical. I just don't trust anybody else. I only trust myself because I'm the only one that's never let me down. And as we make those excuses, everyone else around us, well, they're rolling their eyes because they see what we can't see. They see the pride in us that we're making excuses for. There's a book that came out several years ago. You may have heard of it by Jim Collins, How the Mighty Fall. I read this a few years ago. Jim Collins is the same guy who wrote the book Good to Great. And this is the sequel to Good to Great. And what's interesting is Jim Collins researches several companies, corporations that were great in the eyes of the world at one time. I mean, very successful companies that later failed, that fell apart. And as he researched all these different companies that failed, he came up with basically different stages that all of these companies took to get to the point of failure. And I'm going to list them up here. There's 5 of them, but I'm going to leave off the first one for a second. Number 2 was the undisciplined pursuit of more. Number 3 was denial of reality. They couldn't accept reality. Number 4 was grasping for salvation, like they wanted a savior, some executive to come in and save them because they were finally realizing they were in trouble. And then last was the death of the organization. But you know what Jim Collins says all of these failing companies had in common? The first step is this: ego, or hubris, as he calls it. If you don't know what hubris means, here's the definition: excessive pride, arrogance, cockiness that brings down a hero. In other words, they were so full of themselves, they couldn't see that they had problems. And so they were heroes in the corporate world. But they were quickly brought down by their own pride and arrogance and cockiness. And it's amazing to me how the secular world just backs up what the Bible has been teaching us for thousands of years. And so let me ask you, how does pride disguise itself in your life? Because if you want to wreck your life, pride's the way to do it. So what I want to do is I want to wrap up here with some signs of pride. Like, what are some signs that pride is in our life? And I want for us to examine ourselves. But before I give you these different signs of having pride in your life, I want to reference the movie Hitch. You guys seen this movie, between Will Smith and Kevin James, And in this movie, like, Will Smith is the uber super cool guy and Kevin James is not. And so Will Smith is trying to teach him how to dance because Kevin James doesn't know how to dance. And so Will Smith is like, okay, show me what you got. And Kevin starts breaking out in all these moves and his hands are going everywhere and whatever. And Will Smith is like, don't ever do that again, okay? This is what I want for you to do. And this is what Will Smith says. This is his advice. He says, I want you to put your elbows to the side and I want for you to keep your elbows 6 inches above your waist at a 90-degree angle and just move back and forth like that. That's all I want you to do. Just move back and forth, elbows to the side. Don't put your elbows out at all for any reason. And that's the advice I'm going to give you as we go through this list. Keep your elbows to your side because I know how tempting it is. When we go through this list, it's like, hey, did you hear that? Hey, yeah, I know somebody like that. Yeah, I know how tempting it is. So this is what we're going to do. If you want to go ahead and physically do it. Put your elbows to the side right now, okay? Because we're going to go through this list and we're not going to look at anybody else. We're just going to look at ourselves and do some self-examination, okay? So here we go. Here are some signs of pride. Are you ready? Keep your elbows down. You get easily offended when you don't get your way. You fly off the handle. You get mad. You get irritated when you don't get your way, even when it comes to small things. How about this one right here? You need others to always agree with you. You've heard the phrase before, agree to disagree. You just never follow that. You don't believe that anybody can disagree with you. When somebody disagrees with you, you turn them into an enemy. Guys, I see this happen on social media all the time. I think it's fine if you want to express your opinions on social media in a healthy, loving, Christ-honoring way. But I see people that when someone disagrees with them on social media, they turn them into an enemy and they attack them. Sad. How about this one? Your wants and your desires are more important than others. What you want matters more than what other people want. So you think, hey, it's okay if I cut line. Now, they're not allowed to cut line, but I'll cut line because my wants, my desires are more important than theirs. How about this one right here? You always think it's the other person who needs to change. If there's a conflict or an issue, it's not your fault, it's their fault. They need to change. They need to be the one to fix it. Maybe right now some of you guys are in a conflict right now and you just keep saying, they need to fix it, they need to change. And maybe they do. But is there anything you can do? Or are you always pointing the finger at somebody else, blaming somebody else? How about this one? You're more negative and critical than you are grateful. Guys, humble people are grateful people. Because humble people realize they don't deserve anything. Humble people realize they don't deserve the life that they've been given by God. So they're grateful for what they have. I personally, I don't deserve the life that I have right now. I don't deserve the salvation that I have in Jesus Christ. I don't deserve my wife and my kids. I don't deserve the home that I live in. I don't deserve the car that I drive, the clothes that I wear. I don't deserve to be part of this church. I don't deserve to stand on this stage. The only thing that Chad deserves is hell for all eternity. And Jesus has taken care of that for me. And so because of that, I'm grateful for everything I have. Because do I have everything that I want and desire? No. But I have way more than I deserve, and so do you when you think about it. Humble people are grateful people. But prideful people, well, they're all about what they want, and so when they don't get it, they're critical and they're negative all the time. How about this one? Your self-worth is determined by your performance. It's all about what you do, and so you want everybody to know what you do. You humble brag all the time. You guys know what that is. Like you're in a small group and it's prayer request time and you offer a prayer request for somebody else, but in the process you're really bragging about what you did. You know what I'm talking about? You want to brag on yourself. You want to promote yourself because your identity is all about your performance. What about this one? You can't celebrate someone else's success. In fact, you get jealous or upset when somebody else is more successful than you at something. Even sometimes we're cheering for them to fail. Maybe you even put other people down in order to make yourself look better. That's an issue of pride. How about this one? You squeeze wise, gifted people out of your life. You don't want wise, gifted people around you. You don't want people who know more than you, who are more spiritual than you, or more intelligent than you, because you want to be the expert in the room. You want to be the smartest guy in the room. You want to be the one that everybody looks to. And if there's somebody else who's wise or somebody else who knows more than you around, you squeeze that person out because you don't have space for them. Now, there are other signs of pride that I could list up here. I'm just out of time. But you know what they are for you. And I wonder if any of those registered for you personally today. So let me ask you this question. How does pride disguise itself in me, in you? Because pride will creep into all of our lives if we're not careful. And we need to be careful. Because 1 Peter 5, verse 5 says this, God opposes the proud but shows favor to the humble. Humble yourselves therefore under God's mighty hand that he may lift you up in due time. What is the Bible telling us? God opposes the proud. That word opposes literally means to draw a battle line. If you want to live at odds with God, then live with pride. Because you are actually putting yourself up against God. You are going to battle against God when you let pride run your life, when pride goes unchecked. And so what the Bible is saying is, don't let pride control your life. Humble yourself under God's mighty hand. He'll lift you up. He will give you the reward that you deserve in this life. He will give you what you're looking for. He will fulfill your soul. He will lift you up in due time. But pride will rob you of experiencing God's greater purpose for your life. And honestly, I think that churches today are full of people that God wants to use in greater ways, but he's not able to use them right now because there's too much pride in their hearts. Rick Ashley, you may recognize that name. We had him speak here about a year and a half ago or so. And he's a preacher at a big church, mega church in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. Rick's one of my favorite preachers. Recently, he's become a pretty good friend of mine. And I love Rick a lot. But Rick has been very successful in ministry. I mean, he leads a large church. He's written several books. He speaks at conferences all over. And in fact, just the conference that some of our staff went to in Arizona a couple weeks ago, he was one of the speakers at that conference. And I've heard Rick tell the story before in a sermon. I even asked him about it personally one time because it hit me when I heard it. About when he first graduated college, he took an internship at a very large church under a very well-known preacher. It was going to be a preaching internship. So he arrived the first day and he went to this well-known preacher and he was like, okay, what do you want me to do? I'm ready to learn. And the preacher handed him one of these. It was a golf pencil. And he said, our auditorium, these are in the backs of all the pews. And they need to be sharpened every now and then because people wear them out, filling out their silent roll call cards. This is back in the day when you had silent roll call cards. And the preacher said, I want you to go around, I want you to sharpen every one of those pencils. I mean, there were hundreds and hundreds of pencils in this auditorium. And Rick was like, what? And so he was doing it, but he was mad. He said to himself, I took 2 years of Greek in college for this? I graduated top of my class in order to sharpen pencils? What? He was mad. And as he was sharpening these pencils, all of a sudden he said, it's as if God almost directly spoke to him because he heard this in his head. He heard this, if you're too big to do something small for God, then you're too small to do anything big for God. And so Rick said from that point on, he started to sharpen pencils like everybody's salvation depended on it. And he sharpened those pencils with passion and desire. And all of his life, he's never forgotten that if you're too big to do something small for God, then you're too small to do anything big for God. And I think one of the reasons why God has used Rick in phenomenal ways throughout his life is because he never forgot that. Humble yourself under God's mighty hand, and he will lift you up in due time. And maybe right now, God wants to do more in your life than what you're allowing him to do because there's just too much pride where there doesn't need to be. If you want to wreck your life, ignore the road closed sign, because the road that leads to pride, well, it'll leave your life a wreck. But if you'll pay attention to what God is saying, God will give you a greater life with greater purpose where your soul is fulfilled and content. Let's pray. Father, I thank you so much for today. In this moment, we've had to dive into your word and study, and we just pray that we will be a humble people who don't let pride run our lives, but who listen to you, pay attention to you, and who go where you are leading us. Father, we just love you so much, and it's through your Son's name, Jesus Christ, that I pray. Amen.